Уважаеми организатори, уважаеми колеги и гости, приех поканата да изнеса пред вас пленарен доклад с удоволствие, но едновременно и с малко притеснение, защото в действителност не знаех какво бих могла да ви представя, така че ви е интересно. Така че благодаря ви, организатори. Уважаеми колеги и гости, приех поканата да изнеса пред вас пленарен доклад с удоволствие, но едновременно и с малко притеснение, защото в действителност не знаех какво бих могла да ви представя, така че ви е интересно. За мен е голяма чест да бъда не просто аз.
Ивелина?
Не знам дали. Така, благодаря ви за поканата и честит празник. Моята презентация ще бъде на английски, понеже от една страна не знаех каква ще бъде публиката, дали всички говорят български или разбират български, а от друга страна трябва да призная, че ми беше малко по-лесно и с терминологията. Dear colleagues, today I will talk about motivation in language learning, more specifically in learning Bulgarian as a second language. We often talk about motivation. We identify ourselves or other people as being motivated or lacking motivation. But what is motivation after all? Is it just the momentary state of excitement that makes us to impulsively start a new project? What happens after this initial moment of excitement, and how do we keep up during the process while struggling to learn something? From my personal experience over the years, motivation, I believe that it has two main characteristics that can be empirically observed. Motivation is not a constant, and it is not evenly distributed among individuals. And here by individuals, I, of course, refer to our students. No matter how great the effort of the teacher is or how good the learning conditions are, there will always be differences in level of motivation among members of a group. So what happens in our educational system, and I don't know if in the Bulgarian one is the same, is that people come already demotivated from the secondary education, where the learning mechanisms they use do not encourage free critical thinking. They are mainly asked to learn by heart and reproduce the information without developing some understanding of it. So their motivation is mostly extrinsic, utilitarian, to get good grades and go to a good high school and so on. So they learn because they need to, basically. Learning a language, unless it's your mother tongue, is, especially in adulthood, is uncomfortable, sinuous, and needs a strong driving force involving a lot of effort and individual work. Although motivation has a central role in second language learning and is thought to compensate for shortages in other areas of the process, we must admit that the success of the learning of foreign language depends on a combination of factors, not only motivation, such as effort, environment, beliefs, perspectives, goals, attitudes. All these items reflect in our behavior. And here you can see scheme of factors that contribute to human behavior and drivers for behavior. This explains why some people, even though highly motivated, do not have a successful outcome. Not only human behavior, but also motivation as an integrative part of the former can be influenced by different internal or external aspects. The variation of motivation in learning can be summed up by the following figure you see here. So the interconnection between motivation and other elements that can affect the effectiveness of the act of learning can be seen in second language acquisition as well. Early L2 motivation studies achieved a breakthrough in establishing that successful foreign language learning is not merely the product of intelligence and aptitude efforts made to learn the language, are also an important factor, and these efforts are affected by a range of attitudinal variables. From this brief introduction, we can really conclude that motivation is a very complex concept, seen as an essential component of goal-oriented behavior. But what is motivation after all? According to the Oxford Learners Dictionaries, motivation is the reason why somebody does something or behaves in a particular way, or the feeling of wanting to do something, especially something that involves hard work and effort. From a psychological point of view, there are many theories of motivation, most of them discussed in the comprehensive study of Bandu et alia from 2024. Some of them we will also very briefly present in order to better understand the framework of the present paper and how the concept of motivation has developed from an oversimplified perspective to a very advanced one. So the most, let's say, simplistic one and the oldest theory is that of instinct theory of motivation, which suggests that behaviors are driven by innate instincts that are biologically programmed within individuals. This theory asserts that certain behaviors are instinctual and do not require learning or experience. Instincts are thought to be inherited and are common to all members of a species, which of course it is a very simple way of understanding motivation. The arousal theory of motivation suggests that people are motivated to maintain an optimal level of arousal, which refers to a state of alertness. It was proposed by psychologist Clark Hall and further developed by Yerkes and Dodson. And this theory posits that individuals seek to maintain an optimal level of arousal that varies based on the complexity and novelty of the task. Also, the incentive theory of motivation that was first introduced by the same behaviorist Clark Hall suggests that individuals are motivated to act in order to obtain rewards and avoid punishments, which is not so complex way of seeing this behavior. The intrinsic theory of motivation is somehow more advanced one. It was proposed by Edward D.C. It proposes that individuals are driven to engage in activities or behaviors for the inherent satisfaction and enjoyment they experience from the activity itself, rather than for any external rewards or incentives. A more advanced theory was the one of attribution theory of motivation. Heider's theory is, it can account for different behavioral patterns. It explores how individuals attribute their success and failure to different factors and how these attributions influence their motivation and behavior in further situations. The expectancy value theory of motivation, you will also see Vroom's expectancy value theory model here. First developed by Fishbein and Eisen in the 1970s, posits that an individual's motivation to engage in a particular behavior or task is determined by two main factors: their expectancy of success and the value they place on the task or outcome. And two more. The ARCS model, you can see that this is an acronym that stands for Attention, Relevance, Confidence, and Satisfaction. It was developed by Keller, an educational psychologist, in the 1980s, and it focuses on designing appropriate materials in order to enhance motivation in learning environments. For every component you see here, the author proposes different concrete strategies. And this model has been widely adopted for its practicality and effectiveness. The last one, here is the explanation of the other two components, confidence and satisfaction. And the last one I would like to present is the self-determination theory, which was developed by the psychologist Edward D.C. and Richard Ryan in the 80s. This theory revives and extends the concept of intrinsic theory of motivation, stipulating that people are inherently motivated to satisfy the three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. The authors also identified these three types of motivation: the autonomous one, so the intrinsic one, the control motivation, which responds to others, and the aim motivation, which is the total absence of motivation. The SDT theory is the most relevant for the present paper because, as we will see, it was also assumed by Dorney in his studies of L2 acquisition. So we can see how the concept of motivation has evolved from very basic narrow views to very extensive and comprehensive ones. All these theories have been applied and tested in numerous fields such as education, sports, health system, workplace, marketing, etc. Some of them have been successfully integrated in more elaborated models for L2 learning. Here you can see some other theories of motivation. And now about motivation in second language learning, or acquisition, as we want to call it. Here we will only focus on recent theory of Dorney's. His work from 2005 pretty much condenses all the central aspects of motivation in L2 learning, such as self-motivation, teacher motivation, and the relationship between motivation and identity. One of Dorney's most influential contributions in the development of this framework was the L2 motivational self-system. This theory proposes that language learners' motivation is influenced by their ideal L2 self, so the person they aspire to become in terms of language proficiency, and their ought to L2 self, the person they feel they should be in terms of language proficiency. Third, this model is actually a three-dimensional one, and the last element is L2 learning experience, so which encompasses the learner's actual experience in the L2 learning process. Another study we will talk about is Ryan's study from 2008, which is called The Ideal L2 Selves of Japanese Learners of English, and contains an extensive investigation of the motivation in Japanese learners of English as a foreign language. It is a cross-sectional study with a mixed research design, including both quantitative and qualitative methods, with focus on the quantitative data extracted from a large-scale mood and feelings questionnaire, hence MFQ. Prior and following the questionnaire, two sets of interviews were conducted, with the first one being exploratory and the latter explanatory. The study has a great statistical significance since it was made on a sample of 2,397 individuals of the target population. The participants were selected from secondary and post-secondary educational institutions, some of them being university English majors and the others university English minors. Ryan replicated an earlier longitudinal study of Dorney's and colleagues who conducted similar research on Hungarian English learners from secondary education. Dorney's findings suggested that the most salient factor in students' motivation to learn English as a foreign language was integrativeness. Integrativeness represents the desire to learn a foreign language in order to integrate, to acquire a sense of belonging to the L2 community, to be accepted as one of their own. However, Ryan was intrigued by the fact that the most motivating element is integrativeness, since not all students have access to the L2 community, and wanted to build a more comprehensive framework. That being the case, he created an enriched version of the MFQ with 17 composite variables and 100 questions and tested it on Japanese population. The results of Ryan's research show that integrativeness alone does not play the central role in Japanese students' motivation. He divided the Garnerian concept of integrativeness into two variables coded under the name of attitudes to learning English and attitudes toward L2 community. The obtained data showed that the strongest correlation occurs between three motivational variables: ideal L2 self, and both attitudes to learning English and intended learning effort. Hence, the actual attitudes students have towards the learning process have a straightforward relationship with the effort they are willing to make in order to learn English. This figure here shows that learning efforts is the outcome of an interaction between the ideal L2 self and attitudes to learning. This research has also provided valuable pedagogical insights for the Japanese educational context. Now I will be talking about the Romanian educational context. Bulgarian language is studied in Romania in a few places. In secondary education, Bulgarian is taught as a mother tongue at the theoretical high school St. Cyril and Methodius from Dudești Vechi, Timiș, where the biggest Bulgarian minority is, and at the Bulgarian theoretical high school Hristo Botev from Bucharest, where it can be also taught as a foreign. It is also taught as a foreign language, not only as a mother tongue. In post-secondary education, students can take Bulgarian courses at the University of Bucharest, the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Literatures, and at the University of Craiova, the Faculty of Letters. In post-secondary education, we can find some differences in terms of academic specializations. At the University of Craiova, since the establishment of the Bulgarian lectorate in 1975, Bulgarian is studied as a free elective course by the students in second and third year. At the University of Bucharest, however, Bulgarian is studied within three profiles. The first one is Bulgarian philology, with a history dating back to 1949, so 75 years of uninterrupted teaching activity, where Bulgarian is taught as a major for 3 years in a row. It is also learned as a third language by students in their first and second year of studying translation and interpreting. In this case, although it is a compulsory subject, it is somehow randomly assigned because they have a list of several languages they can choose from, and they are enrolled within the limits of available places. Bulgarian can also be studied as a free elective course by students from other specializations in their first year. Here you can see a picture of the high school from Dudești Vechi. And here is the Hristo Botev High School from Bucharest. These are the three main profiles from our post-secondary education. Of course, our main focus is on students from Bulgarian philology because they have the greatest number of courses and we expect them to achieve a high proficiency level in Bulgarian language. Nevertheless, candidates who enroll Bulgarian philology know little or nothing about the culture, customs, music, history, etc. of the neighboring country. Many of them know Bulgaria only from a tourist perspective and from the theoretical history and geography lessons they learned in school. So can we talk about motivation in choosing a certain subject in this case? We strongly believe that the primary fundamental motivation is an extrinsic one that is to be admitted on a finance place, and that intrinsic motivation comes second during the 3 years of bachelor degree. Moreover, they get to choose almost any second specialization they want, so English, French, German, anything, which usually has a test-based admission, and our admission being based on the average score of the national exams. And now I will directly go to my study, Bulgarian as a second language. The main goal of our research was to test if the findings of Ryan's investigation are applicable to our context, and if the same variables can account for motivation in learning Bulgarian as a second language by Romanian students. we also wanted to see if and how the scales vary among the three groups of students differentiated by specialization. And also if there is a correlation between some of the variables. In other words, if they are directly proportional. The methodology. It is very clear that conducting a study such as Ryan's on Romanian learners of Bulgarian language, it is quite far from being similar. Obviously, the hypotheses and instruments of the research needed to be adapted to the specific circumstances. First of all, some of the composite variables used in the original research were not appropriate for our purpose. Therefore, the following were discarded: fear of assimilation, ethnocentrism, and willingness to communicate. The questions included in the first two categories were neither relevant nor plausible for the Romanian reality, since none of the languages in the present study, Romanian or Bulgarian, is considered a lingua franca or faces the danger of assimilation. Moreover, the Romanian and Bulgarian people, although genetically distinct, belong to the Balkan historical region and have similar social, cultural, and geopolitical background, similar beliefs, values, mentalities, customs, and so on. Some examples of items grouped under these variables from Ryan's paper are: using English in front of people makes me feel like I will be thought of as less Japanese. So this would not apply to our context. Using Bulgarian makes me feel less Romanian, because it is not, we don't have a case of assimilation here. As for the third variable, willingness to communicate, we must say that it has already been 16 years since the publication of Ryan's study. And during this period of time, the rapid technological progress has led to fundamental changes in communication patterns, especially in young adults with immediate access to social media platforms. The traditional communicative behaviors have changed, and this can easily be observed among students as well. They tend to avoid verbal communication if they have a choice and replace it with written communication, even when the circumstances are in favor of the first one. Therefore, we decided that questions like the ones below would not be relevant, or they would have a rather small impact on the overall outcome of the questionnaire, since their willingness to communicate in either their mother tongue or their L2 language is environmentally conditioned. So, for example, how likely would you be to initiate communication in both mother tongue or L2 in the following situations, like talking in a small group of strangers? This would not be applicable for our context also. A series of items from the scales we kept were also removed due to incongruity with the Romanian context. For example, from the international empathy variable, we removed the statement studying English, so here we can replace it with Bulgarian. For our case, it will help me to understand people from all over the world, not just English-speaking countries, or in our case, Bulgarian-speaking countries. Of course, there is just one Bulgarian-speaking country. And you can also see some other examples from other variables we had. This way, we ended up having 14 composite variables with items ranging between 2 and 5, so 2 and 5 questions. Here you can see some examples of how the questions were grouped under the variables. The first one is milieu or environment. The second one, the questions under instrumentality. And the third one, the questions are under the ideal L2 self. Although both of the above, for comparison, here we can see the scales used in Dorni's study. Just a moment. Dorni's study, so he had just few scales. Ryan's study, who had 17, and our research, what we kept from Ryan's study. The colors show the mapping of the concepts in the original study and the second study, and marked with red here are the most important motivational factors that were seen after conducting the research. So in Dorni's study would be integrativeness, and in Ryan's study, ideal L2 self. Although both of the above-cited authors argue in favor of mixed methods of research, quantitative and qualitative, in this paper, we will present the results of our primary quantitative investigation. Our final MFQ consisted of 56 items with a Likert scale from 1 to 6, one corresponding to the lowest level of, to the lowest level of agreement with the statement, and 6 to the highest level of agreement. This approach was suggested in the original methodology instead of a 5-point Likert scale because the participants in the pilot study were more prone to choose the middle value of the scale in that case. The questionnaire was designed in Google Forms. Results, we had a total of 27 participants in our survey, which is a good response rate taking into account the number of students who are currently enrolled in a form of higher education that involves studying Bulgarian, that is approximately 45 students. We also had 4 respondents from the who are studying Bulgarian at the University of Craiova. And here you can see the demographics. Most of the respondents were women, more exactly 66.5%, and 29.6% were men. One person didn't prefer not to reveal the gender, so this one in orange is just one person. Regarding the age of the respondents, we can see that the majority were between 19 and 21 years old, so a number of 22 participants, the other being a little bit older. In the following pie chart, we can see that the most consistent part of the participants studies Bulgarian philology, totalizing 59.3% of the respondents, while 25.9%, 7 people just study Bulgarian as a third language, and only 14.8% study it as a free elective subject. As for the year of study, yeah, just a moment. Most of the students are in their first year, representing 75.1% of the total group. The next chart shows us how many of them had some knowledge of Bulgarian language before admission. So just 7.4%, that is 2 people, responded that they knew some basic, they had some basic knowledge of Bulgarian, but not at a satisfactory level. The last question was about how many foreign languages they speak. This question was asked in order to make some later correlation of the overall capacity of foreign language acquisition and the motivation to learn Bulgarian. So as we can see, the highest response rate was 3, most of them 37%. So most of them speak or know 3 languages. Okay, the statistical analysis of the data. Here you can see the abbreviation of the variables we worked with in order to simplify the process. The statistical data analysis was made with the help of a statistician in R. The 56 questions were grouped by the 14 variables we kept from Ryan's study. Here you can see the raw mean values of the scores in a descending order. The first 5 highest scores resulted from the variable interest in foreign languages, international contact, attitudes toward language learning, towards learning the second language, travel orientation, and international empathy. But these are not necessarily the ones that explain the group variance. The theory we reviewed says that motivation alone is not enough to have positive outcomes. Thus, motivation should be materialized by effort. So the higher the motivation, the greater the effort. Therefore, we chose the variable intended learning effort as being the most useful for the motivation in every individual. For this variable, we then performed the one-way ANOVA analysis to see if there is any statistical significant difference between the means of the groups divided by the categorical variable specialization. And based on the F value, Okay, so these are the hypotheses, the null hypothesis and the alternative one. And this is the analysis. Based on the F value of 0.093, we can conclude that between the general group and the subgroups divided by specialization, it is no difference in terms of variance. The F value should have been close to 1 in order to confirm the null hypothesis. However, the p-value of 0.912 is greater than the level of significance of 0.05, which suggests that the correlation observed in the sample is likely to be due to chance. The null hypothesis that there is no correlation between intended learning effort and specialization in the population is therefore not rejected. Accordingly, further analysis is required. Next, we perform the same analysis for all variables. The large F values here in the table show us that the variation among group means is more than we would expect to see by chance. They explain much of the total variance of the group, but not completely, because F value is not equal to 1. Hence, the specialization does play a role in explaining the variance among groups. Hence, there is a correlation between it and the 4 variables with high value: parental encouragement, milieu or environment, ideal L2 self, and cultural interest. The categories that have large mean values in the first column, but small F ratios and the p-value greater than 0.05 reflects the uniformity of the answers. Afterwards, the principal component analysis was performed in order to explain which of the variables have the greatest influence on the sample. This technique reduces the dimension of the data set while retaining as much information from the data as possible. The correlation matrix was generated without the variable intended learning effort, which was used in modeling the data. Here we can see the factor loading. The loadings for any given factor provide information on how correlated each variable is with that factor. From the first component, the variable attitudes to learning English has the highest coefficient. So here you can see we use the data from just the first and second component. And here we have the variables. We use the 14 variables. And the highest score on the first component, from the first component, the variable attitudes to learning English has the highest coefficient, that is 0.368. This one, so this one here actually is the highest. Seconded by instrumentality, and followed by attitudes to learning, to the L2 community, so to the Bulgarian community. Usually from the PCA test, we retain just the first 2 elements as being the most influential and justifying the variance, but this time we observed that some of the coefficients were very close in value, so the second and the third one. We can see that the variance in the second component is on the variable anxiety, so 0.595, and it is followed by language, second language self-confidence, and environment. So these are the variables that have the most influence on students' motivation. And now here is the total variance of the principal components with And now the conclusions. So from the statistical analysis, it appears that there is a correlation between specialization, Bulgarian philology, translation and interpreting, free elective course, and the variables parental encouragement, environment, ideal L2 self, and cultural interest. Although the variance cannot be completely explained only based on this assumption. As we said in the beginning, this study is in the preliminary analysis phase and requires further processing. Opposed to Ryan's findings, Romanian students who learn Bulgarian seem to have different motivational drivers. The most important are the factors with the highest loading on the first component, so attitudes to learning Bulgarian, instrumentality, and attitudes toward the Bulgarian community. The second component revealed that the rest of the variance can be explained by anxiety, L2 self-confidence, and environment. We still do not know what kind of relation is between these important motivational factors and if the correlation is a positive or a negative one. This will be a future task for us to complete. The only common element in our findings is the variable attitudes to learning the second language, which was also an important piece in Ryan's study, but the connection there was a three-dimensional one. As for the ideal L2 self, the variable that appeared to be the fundamental unit of the Japanese students' motivation, it has an insignificant role in Romanian context. Our students do not necessarily have that future projection of themselves, the representation of themselves as and their abilities in terms of language proficiency. This information can help us adapt the teaching methods to the specific needs of the students, insisting on their strengths and improving the strategies that were inappropriate in order to help them overcome the challenges of learning Bulgarian. And some future goals we have. Our study is in a very incipient phase, as I told before. But the collected data is valuable and can be exploited in many other ways. Our main goal is to go further with the statistical analysis and track how the results vary by gender, by year of study, analyze the way variables interact with each other, that is, which one influences which, and perform the intercorrelation analysis and partial correlation analysis of the variables with the highest scores in ANOVA analysis. We also plan to extend the study with a qualitative research, that is follow-up interviews. And on the long term, we would like to develop a longitudinal study, a tool through which we can track how motivation fluctuates in the same individuals during their 3 years of university education. And this was all. Благодаря ви много за вниманието. Надявам се, че не ви беше толкова скучно. И